Welcome to In the Office Cast with John Kent and Adam Scory, a podcast about business culture, technology, and solving the challenges and misconceptions surrounding hybrid and remote working.
Welcome, Emma Rainey, to the In the Office podcast. Neighbour, friend, and also fellow marketing person. Are you well?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
I've been looking forward to getting you on the podcast for a little while. So this is great because we've been talking about doing podcasts together for some time now, haven't we?
We have, and every time we get together, an hour turns into 3. So I'm hoping to keep this succinct.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. It needs to be an hour. Okay, so probably the best thing to do is just let you introduce yourself. So Emma, do you want to just share with our listeners, who are you, what have you been doing, and what are you doing now?
Sure. So as you introduced, Emma Rainey, and I have been doing corporate marketing roles for a while now, and they were all really with US IT and SaaS companies up until a couple of years ago when I was made redundant for the first time, having really survived many acquisitions in that space. It finally caught up with me when I was working for a US fintech. And I had for some time wanted to really work with smaller companies. Although my career had gone from, marketing exec, marketing manager, VP, global marketing director, I was very fortunate to have a progressive career. As those businesses got bigger and bigger, you became a smaller fish in a much bigger pond. And I didn't want it to be that way. So I had been thinking for some time about wanting to work with smaller businesses. So when I got made redundant, it kind of allowed me that opportunity to say, well, do it now, or you either go back and have another crack at the corporate role. And to be honest, I was bruised and battered from it all, and decided to give that a go. So I set up on my own. I liked the fractional side of things because it allowed flexibility, and I know we'll talk a lot about that today. It's allowing me to work with all sorts of various, businesses, and really just kind of 2 years in, still trying to, get to grips with it and kind of make that work. So now I'm, a fractional CMO, working part-time for a number of businesses, and just, trying to ramp that up now, really.
Yeah. I was asked this morning, actually, what a fractional CMO is.
Well, the word fraction, obviously, indicates it's a part.
Yeah.
It's not a whole. So we are either CMOs or heads of marketing, or people that have worked in marketing at a senior level.
Yeah.
That basically do that job, but on a part-time basis for different companies.
Right.
And so you often work probably 4 to 6 days a month for a company, and you might work 2 days a month for another company, and you might work 8 days a month for somebody else. And really you build up what we call a portfolio career of working with different companies on a part-time basis, but providing that senior marketing leadership support.
Right. Okay. So these are companies being sort of smaller businesses. They couldn't afford to have somebody of your caliber to come into them and pay for them as a full-time employee. So
it can be. So you do often get some large companies as well.
okay.
So there are, I suppose, there's two real scenarios. The smaller company, which has grown to a size where they're now got their leadership team. They don't have anybody really in marketing. The sales or commercial directors dabbling, the CEOs dabbling. They may have an office junior that's doing a bit of marketing, or they may even have a marketing person, but nobody really sitting at that table to provide any strategic input. And I guess for SMEs, it's sometimes difficult to really justify the risk of spending what is now an average of about £125,000 a year for a CMO. You know, they just don't necessarily have that type of money. So, but they need somebody at the table. They can see a widening gap, you know, being created between the people who are trying to do it at the top, the person who's trying to execute it. There's no real strategy, and there's this gaping chasm, and they're thinking about how they're going to meet their perhaps aggressive goals to growth. But then in bigger companies, you often have a team of marketers, could be perhaps up to 5, and then you might have a head of marketing, but who isn't strong enough, who isn't senior enough, strategic enough to lead them perhaps into that next phase. And again, you may have that senior leadership team, which doesn't include, you know, anybody from marketing, and they're slowly realizing that they need somebody, you know, at that table. So it really is where, you know, companies are growing and they identify that marketing is an important part of that growth. They can't do it doing what they've done before. They need to be more mature about it, and so they need somebody to come in and do that. But like I say, in a lot of cases, the price tag, we all know what the budget bought us last week, and some are already doing the calculations on what that means for national insurance contributions and wages and things like that. And, you know, we are seeing some of those headcounts being slashed. And so actually the fractional approach may actually be a way of getting around that. I would say in the next couple of years, we may see a resurgence in fractional marketing support.
So is it that you kind of helicopter in, and the senior leadership team, then they've got specific goals or targets that they want to hit that aren't being met, or is it the fact that they don't really know what they want, or is it a mixture of kind of the two?
Mixture of both, Adam. Actually,
yeah.
We see a lot of lost founders and CEOs of smaller companies, where whatever they're doing now in terms of sales is not going to cut their growth. So they don't know how to get there. They don't know enough about marketing, and they want somebody literally to come in and take it. But as we've just been discussing, they can't always, you know, afford that. Sometimes, however, though, it may be that it's just a mess, and they need there's no strategy, you know, there's no real direction, and the team, the marketing team are not really being, focused on at all. They're seen as an appendage to sales. They're not really functioning, right, embracing technology and all the other stuff. So we do sometimes go in and kind of sort it all out, gain some order and structure. And sometimes we go in and we do this kind of on a project basis.
Right.
I tend to prefer longer term relationships.
Yep.
Because then you can really feel embedded. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that, it is kind of a risk, that you go in on a part-time basis and you don't become part of that organization enough.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important. You are that company's CMO.
Yeah.
So be embedded, be present, get involved, make those relationships. The fact that you're just doing that, you're working officially 2 days a week or 1 day a week, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important point, about fractional work. You hold that position, you just work part-time.
So there is a mindset when you go in to go, actually, I consider myself a member of staff. I'm on that senior leadership team, and I will act that way when I'm sat in this seat, whether it's I'm in the office or working from home or whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. And I think if you go in with that mindset that you've got to go, and you've taken on too many other roles, you can't devote the time to that company, then I think you're either doing too much, or perhaps it's not for you. So you have to be present. You have to have that mindset. You have to be very organized, and make every hour that you work for them count. And I think that's, you work on hours. So if you work, you've got a 2-day contract, you're working for, about 16 hours with them. Everything has to count. And largely, well, I personally record all my time. When I worked for a corporate, I never wrote down exactly, what I did for how long, but I like to understand exactly how much I have done for every client. So I have that mindset that I make sure that everything counts. I understand how much I'm working for them, and whatever I do during that time really has to be valuable. Unlike when you're got a full-time job, you may go out for an elongated lunch, or you might sit around talking in the office, or whatever. It's generally a bit more protracted. It's a lot more focused. That's how I work anyway.
Yeah. That brings me to the question around sort of coach and play a bit. So it sounds to me you sit more on the balcony looking down and guiding, maybe working with the manager of the team, as it were, but you're very much more, you're not hands-on, you don't get into the weeds, you're not playing on the pitch, you're up there directing things.
Well, that's a great question. The seniority of the role should indicate that you have a degree of that, looking down on the marketing department, sorting out that structure, sorting out that strategy and direction, and being a strong ally to that leadership team, and translating those business goals into a marketing plan that the team can execute. I think one of the common perceptions sometimes is that we're consultants.
Right. Yeah.
And although we bring that strategic and consultative element, just like we would if we were in a corporate, a full-time corporate role, we do roll our sleeves up and get stuck in. We don't just tell people what to do. Yes, we advise, we make relationships, we communicate and collaborate, but we also get stuck in. Remember what we said right at the beginning. We are those roles, but we're just on a part-time basis. So we roll our sleeves up, very, very much. I would say though, sometimes when you're called, to work with a company, the scenario is that they want to go down the marketing route, but they bring you in as the only marketing resource.
Oh.
And it's like, okay, so what are the expectations here? Do you want me to come in and, formulate a strategy for you in the hours that I work?
Yeah.
Or are you expecting me to execute on this as well?
Yeah.
When you get to the point that they want you to execute as well, you're paying a lot of money for someone to write emails. And that is a common, you could become a very expensive marketing manager. At that point. So, one of those biggest hurdles is around managing those expectations, with the founders and CEOs that you work with, being very clear on the value that you can bring. But, if you want someone to come and write emails and send them out, that's not what a fractional marketing director or CMO is really designed to do. However, we do some of that operational work because it is part and parcel of that relationship building as well.
You're a fractional CMO by very nature of that role. You're kind of hybrid, right? That's a default for you because you're in and out of businesses in short little spurts. So what are you seeing as the norm now for hybrid? Because obviously there's been loads of headlines around this kind of whole return to office mandates. How is that reflected in the businesses that you work with? What are you seeing?
Most of the clients that we work with are small to medium businesses, even startups. And I see those very much retaining the flexible working environment. They, in some cases, have shut their office.
Really?
They have small workforces. And I work with a lot of tech companies who, just really have, they have their applications, they collaborate online really well. And yes, one of my clients shut down their office. Others we're seeing maintaining that flexibility. I think it's the larger companies that have become a little bit more rigid. And if you read some of the articles online, it's like, well, is that a bandwagon approach? So Tesco's, Asda, Morrison's all have done a bit of a 180 on their flexible working policies since COVID. And you read between the lines and it's like, well, if one's doing it, perhaps, we should do it. And I think it's really interesting because, a lot of them are really talking about we want to foster more of a collaborative environment, a culture of, innovation, or whatever. I think this is a really tricky question because the post-COVID way of working, well, during COVID and post-COVID, whether you liked it or not, it was disrupted, and everybody got used to working in a very different way. And some people liked it, and some people didn't. Some people got very affected by it, but I still think that people got very used to it, and people got used to the sustainability of it.
Yeah.
And I think, that they weighed up, well, I feel quite lonely, and it's some negatives to it, but actually there's a lot of positives to it. And like we said before, I think, do they really want to go back to it?
Yeah.
So I think it's been really interesting following in the press, about, what people like JD Sports, Tesco's, Boots, they're all starting to do in the UK. One of the most recent ones is obviously Amazon.
Oh yeah.
And they've been very, very forceful about returning to work. I was reading an article in Forbes, and they said 91% were dissatisfied with the new mandate, and 73%, I think, we're looking for new jobs. I mean, that's huge. I mean,
73%.
73. It was an article on Forbes, from Forbes, so no
Bloody
word of a lie.
hell.
It's a recent
Yeah.
article at the beginning of last month. And I think they're hiding behind this, or they're thinking it's because they want to foster this collaborative, innovation. It's around culture and everything like that, and they believe that can only be done in person.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree that human contact, is important, but we've got so many collaborative tools now. And I think one day in the office, being collaborative and seeing people and interacting, sometimes by the end of that one day, I think, oh, God, I want out of here. I just want to get back to my office, download everything, get on with it, put everything into action. I can't do that personally if I'm, stuck in an office all the time where there is that this distraction. And I think there's a lot of buzz online about whether actually this mandate is counterproductive.
Yep.
I think, the working parents are being quite affected. Again, in one of the similar articles, I think it was McKinsey who had done a bit of a survey on this. It was about women in the workplace, but I want to caveat that because there are, men that look after children as well. So we'll call it parents. But anyway, in this particular survey, it was about women in the workplace that were considering reducing their hours or quitting as a result of changes in workplace policy. And that was nearly, I think it was 38 to 40% of people that were surveyed, in that. And there was this movement that they cited called resenteeism, where people are now staying in roles under protest and they resent these changes in working environments that are are being put. They've got used to that flexibility. They've got used to sitting in their home office in those pajamas or whatever they want to do, but being equally as productive.
Yeah.
And
it's what it comes down to, though, right? Instead of resent quitting or resent staying or whatever you want to call it, but it's like surely it comes down to productivity and whether companies have actually understand what that means truly.
Well, I think one of the things that they do talk about is they feel almost robbed of the trust and the respect that they had when they were allowed to work more flexibly. And I think I think that's part of the resentment. It's like, well, you don't trust me anymore to do this. I think there's a halfway house, here to be had, and I do think having days in the office, is good. It does make those connections. You have those water cooler, in environments. But if you hide behind the fact that you think that is going to improve culture, I would probably disagree, because I still believe that culture is driven from the top, and it's not about where you work necessarily. It's about how you work, like I said. So I think this is a debate that will go on and on. But anybody working in a fractional way is very, very used to working in a hybrid environment. Whether that means the hours that they work for that company is in the office, you're still not present in that office every day. So by the very nature, like you said, you are kind of a hybrid worker.
Yeah.
And I think anybody who's been doing a fractional role for a while would not necessarily want to go back and have that mandate put on them, which I guess is another reason why people continue to do it despite the the peaks and the troughs of the role.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we talk about, in essence, trying to force collaboration, to try and force ingenuity and force innovation, rather than, is it better to actually have that happen naturally, or allow teams and people, and this is what our software does ultimately, is trying to help people collaborate and come together when it's right for them, making sure people in the office need to be together and allowing them to actually sit in, all that kind of stuff. But surely as a business, you want people to be able to choose the right moments within their own workflow to have those spark moments. Yes, of course. We talk about, those water cooler moments, or the, standing around and chatting with somebody you haven't done for a long time and go, oh, I've got that project. Can you help with that? Oh, yeah, I'd really like to help with that, blah, blah, blah. Having that as an organic entity within your business, or entity within business, is going to be surely far better than trying to pressure cooker it into a system.
I think trying to do a square peg in a round hole is not going to be beneficial for anybody. I think forcing an environment, I think you only have to look at when people go into the office, they're sitting in their cubicle with their headphones on, and they're not really communicating, apart from when they have to get up and go for a cigarette or go and get a coffee. It's like, you get a bunch of people together, they're actually just all on their phones. I think people have just become so conditioned to kind of being on appliances or using online tools for their work and collaborating through that. How many times have we been in an office where you're sitting next to someone and you're sending them an email?
I had that. I sat, literally, I had the editorial director of the business. I was an editor, he's an editorial director. He sat behind me. Literally, I could reach and touch his shoulder, and he sent me an email because he was on his headphones. This was 20 years ago.
Right.
I mean, Jesus Christ.
So
I was like, what?
So is returning to the office, mandating that return to the office, with that in mind, what we just said, is it going to really make an impact on productivity? No, because I just don't think it will, because you go in and you do exactly the same thing that you would have been doing from your home office.
I think
a large part of the time.
I think the office the purpose of the office needs to change. But John and I have spoken about this an awful lot, actually. And I think we've had conversations like this in our coffee chats, but just around thinking differently about what you want the office to do for your team. Different people want different things from the office. Mums want a break, dads want a break, sales teams want to gather and have that kind of, all that energy to, BDM teams, all that kind of stuff. Marketeers might want to get together and go, right, let's work on this problem together. We've got this challenge. Financial teams just might want some bloody peace and quiet because we've got to get a head down, and we've got month end, year end, whatever, quarter end, whatever the case may be. So some people want to just, do you know what? I want some focus time. I can't really do that at home because I've got roommates, or I'm living at home with brothers, sisters, mothers, whatever. So my hope is that people will change the way that they format the office to create these spaces for connection and productivity, rather than just everyone's got a desk and you go to your desk and we're going to try and force culture. We're going to try and force collaboration, connectivity, and just hope, this strategy of hope that things will work out. And I think that's what we're seeing right now is the old-fashioned adage that CEOs think that productivity is a bum in a seat and hear people on a keyboard. Oh, I feel good about myself because I can see my 500 people, rather than actually have we. One of our clients, I think they said they found 120 measures to determine productivity in their business. They did a study and they said, they really understood what productivity meant to them. And for them, hybrid worked brilliantly because they're an international business. They work all around the world and they collaborate across all the businesses. So that they really did study productivity well. And I think a lot of businesses don't do that. They maybe look at KPIs or individual swim lanes of productivity and go, well, that's not going to work. From a helicopter view, not knowing and talking to the people doing the jobs, they just make a decision based on, well, it can't, right?
Yeah. And I think, as a manager, you have to manage your team to generate an outcome.
Yeah.
And personally, do I feel as though I can do that better with them sitting around me more than I can if they were working from their home office or whatever? No, I don't feel as I would do it any better if I was in the office.
No.
So I think as a manager, you leverage the tools and utilize office space when you need to facilitate an outcome. So if you need to discuss performance,
You're not going to do that in a Costa, are you? Sat on
no,
a machine.
absolutely. A horse is for courses, isn't it? Really, if you would need to make a presentation, you want to ideate about a campaign. So you need a whiteboard and you need to do that. Yeah, absolutely. Utilize those spaces. And I think doing that sporadically, bringing people together. But I think then as a manager, you've got so many tools, and I think this is what defines, probably sorts out a good manager from not so good manager is your ability to check in with people, inspire people, lead people from, anywhere. I do think that making sure that you utilize video, conference calls is really important. I much prefer having a conversation with someone when I can see them. You can see the whites of their eyes. Do I need to be right next to them to assess whether they're having a bad day because of the look on their face? No.
We're conditioned to know that, aren't we? I mean, that's it. Facial expressions and stuff. So
absolutely, body language,
we know.
Everything like that.
Tone of voice. Yeah.
And then I think going back to this, do you feel more connected to a company if you are in the office? Well, I think there is an element to say you are surrounded by people supposedly working for the same ultimate goal. You are working for the people, or there's going to be potentially leaders around you that are probably instilling that culture. But the question is, do they? Do they take that opportunity of being in the office to live and breathe the culture, of the organization? So you go into the office and, I think, do you feel more connected to it? I would say no. In fact, actually, I think, again, there was another reported survey on this where I think it was only a 1% difference of people saying that they felt more connected if they were in the office 4 to 5 days a week than they were 2 days a week.
Yeah.
It didn't really make that much difference to how they felt connected. And again, I think this is, the ability of senior leaders, marketing or otherwise, to make sure that you communicate well, you inspire people through all of the means that you have, on online and offline, to make sure that you are, pushing forward in the same way to achieve the outcomes that are expected of you.
Yeah, I mean, these things are not tick box exercises. They have a purpose to them, and the purpose stays the same, whether it's, we're talking on a Zoom call now, or whether it's you actually
Yeah,
meet them face to face. The purpose is exactly the same, right?
absolutely. And you also have to think, I mean, this is a big correlation between, managing a team and marketing.
Mm.
When you're marketing, you need to make an impact on your audience for them to buy your product. So you have to know what makes them tick, what we call persona work.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the same when you're managing a team. You've got 5, 6, 20 personas in your team. And I think you need to know how those people tick to get the best out of them. So it's not necessarily about selling a product, it's about getting the best outcome from them. So if you know that there is somebody really struggling working from home, you as a manager need to be able to work with them in a way that makes them feel more comfortable. Perhaps you have more keep in touch days at the office. You make the effort to go to the office because that is what you do as a leader. You go and you try and get the best out of your team.
Yeah.
You might meet them in a Costa just down the road from wherever, but you adapt to all those people and you pull on all of these levers, tools, whatever you have available, to make sure that you manage in a way that gets the best outcome. But that might be different for all different people, and some of them might want to go into the office. Help them facilitate that. Help them to feel as though they can, but those who don't, help them to feel trusted and respected enough to do their work and to be productive enough to get the outcome. And ultimately, as a leader, you have to manage the outputs and the productivity of everybody, regardless of where they are. And with the right tools, you will know whether they're achieving what they need to achieve. And I really do feel as though, certainly if I was back in a corporate role, that's how I would be managing my team. But I also have to recognize that, a lot of my clients are, remote around, and I have to keep up good communication with them, regardless of whether I see them in the office or not.
Yeah. John and I, well, I've coined the phrase working on the business rather than in it. So when we go in together, we go and meet at the barn, and we try not to actually do work in the business. We try and, kind of come at this as an umbrella strategic point of view. We talk about some of the challenges we're facing right now, and then we work on those problems together, because it's very difficult, particularly in a small business like ours, is to work in it and on it at the same time. You have to, of course you do. But and we try and do this every week. We go down to Surrey to do this. John comes out of London. I come down from the Cotswolds, and wherever we can, it's kind of a day to just kind of we drink coffee. He makes breakfast. I make breakfast. Then we have lunch. We go for a walk, and we chat about stuff. It's not work. It's just not work. We love what we do, but it's that. And being able to certainly from my point of view, if I ever went back into the corporate world, that's definitely what I want to do, is create spaces that allow people to then choose. You
Yes.
can work from home, you can work from here. I don't really mind. I really don't care, because it's, as you say, it's about how are you feeling. And this is something actually, you said this earlier, talking about what the pandemic gave us. For me, one of the key things was the realization for everybody to go, it's okay to want to feel happy at work. In fact, it's actually really important that I feel happy, purposeful, motivated from myself as well as from the company. So it became, I think, the balance of power in terms of that relationship shifted a little bit, actually, became a little bit more towards the employee.
Yeah, and I think I think you're right. I think we gave ourselves the permission to be two things. One is happy at work, but also allow ourselves to recognize when we're not. And
Yes.
a lot of people
Yeah.
will vote with their feet.
73% according to.
Yeah. You know, and it'll be really interesting to see, you know, what happens with the turnover of staff, whether that gets reported and, you know, everything else like that. So, yeah, I think it's really important that you make sure that, I think, you provide those spaces, you provide that flexibility, and you flex to the people in your team and your environment to make sure that, you know, it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I think a lot of these CEOs may be thinking that they have a belief that, you know, productivity and improvements can only be made if everybody is in the office. And I don't actually agree with that. I
No, I
think,
don't.
you know, the success of everything is making a model where you can choose,
Yeah.
but you provide a manager with the tools and the expertise to manage that situation properly.
No, I totally agree, and I think that's one of the biggest things is it comes down to the training of the managers. I mean, that's a whole, you know, rabbit hole we could go down, and we had some figures that I think 70 something percent, I said 78. John had the figures a couple of podcasts ago, are accidental managers, and they don't get trained. There is no training for. It's
Right.
just, you know, you've done your time. You know, it's, you know, you got of a certain age, and it's like, well, I'm going to promote you because you're good at your job. The problem is that not isn't necessarily the person that then should be a manager. They're really good at their
Yeah.
job. Why would you remove them out of that and go, well, I'm going to break that just because I think they're two different things. Being good at your job and being a good manager are very separate things.
And you know, we started our conversation today talking about, you know, why, you know, what scenarios, you know, do fractional CMOs, you know, why do they go into a company? And that is a typical scenario that, you know,
Yeah.
um, you've got somebody that isn't potentially senior enough to manage a team, perhaps in a multi-location environment,
Mm.
you know, and you need that more strategic person, more experienced person to come in and to make sure that that productivity and drive those outcomes, and to manage a team based on the experience and who they
Yeah.
are and how they work. And that's, you know, another part of our role. Really, it's not just about getting the KPI outcome. It's
Yeah.
about, you know, making sure that you help that company retain that staff.
That sustainability piece.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they, you know, they are happy in their role. They're feeling as though they're being invested in, whereas before they probably had, you know, a marketing manager, and then there was this great gap between them and whoever was managing them, you know,
Yeah.
and they weren't really understood, and you
Yeah.
know, it you know, it was a car crash waiting to happen. So, you know, coming into those roles, it's not just, like I say, about improving the number of leads or conversion
Mm.
rates. Yeah, that's really, really important. It's making sure that you create that continuity of
Mm.
resource and knowledge in the marketing department, making sure that you even help to develop those people so they can potentially do you out of a job. You know, but
I say that all
again,
the time, actually. Yeah.
yeah, you need and a lot of it is mentoring as well. It's giving them the space and the opportunity to talk through things that they potentially don't want to admit to somebody who is quite senior in the organization, who they just happen to report to because there's no one else to report to, you know. And suddenly you find that sometimes you become an agony aunt to those people,
Mm.
and they offload on you and say, well, we haven't been able to do this, and we won't be allowed to do that. And maybe some of that is related to how and where they work, you know.
Yeah.
And you sometimes can go in and you can find out that this person is really struggling, you know, because they don't have the right environment. you know, and suddenly you put that person, they've got some great skills, but where they're working, how they're working is just not right for them, and they're considering leaving. All of a sudden you take them out and you put that into another soil flower pot and you water it a little bit, you spend some time with it, and then you get a plant.
That's a good analogy, actually, isn't it? Because when a flower doesn't bloom, you don't lift it out. You don't blame the flower. It's actually the soil that it's in. You need to move it.
Right. Absolutely. And I've seen that so many times where, you know, it's just needed a slight change of environment, you know, bring it out, give it some sunlight, give it some water, give it the optimum conditions, you know, and they will flourish. First of all, you stop people leaving.
Yeah.
You see real enjoyment in somebody's work. Their productivity goes up. And sometimes you just need to be that person between, you know, the most senior leader and that person to be able to say, look, this is the problem. I think we can solve it like this. Would you agree? Would you give me the authority to, you know, to implement whatever?
Yeah.
Communicate that, give it a trial period, and then we might have a completely different outcome rather than having to go and replace that person at great expense.
And time, lack of, productivity, the team becomes destabilized, all these kind of things if there's a team.
Yeah, because, you know, they'll give a month's notice and then they'll be gone. But
Yeah.
it takes you 3 months to recruit. So you're 2 months deficit on work. There's no point. And actually, all you've done is just tweaked a few things, spent some time listening to somebody. And it does, and that's something that you should always do as a manager, whether you're a fractional one or not. But I tell you what does happen when you're a fractional person. Sometimes they view you as slightly removed. And it's like going to a counselor.
Yeah.
You start offloading because you feel as though perhaps they're qualified to do it. They're a little bit more removed. They're not going to judge you, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And actually, you can sort out some team issues quite easily and really well in that fractional role, more than you would elsewhere.
It makes me kind of wonder, that with some of the companies that you mentioned, whether it is fear and poor management that's driving that, not necessarily from the CEO's point of view. It may be the next level down or even the level down going, because they're not trained properly or they don't understand how to do this. They've got to the point where some of their inadequacies are showing and they're not prepared to be vulnerable themselves and go, I don't really know how to do this. Can you train me, please? And it's, instead of do that and be vulnerable, it's right, the best thing is just get everybody back in. So if the CEOs are just hearing from these poorly trained managers that, just get people back in, it'll be easy to manage, right? My life will be so much easier. I do wonder whether it may be, when you've got 50,000 employees and 5,000 of those are managers, and if 4,500 of those are going, don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point, Adam. I think it'd be interesting to scratch beneath the surface on some of these decisions about why people are returning to the office.
What's the data?
What is the data behind that to say, is it a lack of training in that management layer? And I think that is, a really valid point. Is it better to herd everyone together because it becomes easy to manage? I think it's a great point, and I think time will tell to see if, the JD Sports, Boots, Tesco's and all that lot see any impact from getting people back in the office. I'm sure there'll be reports on that coming out in the year to come.
Yeah, I think there will. I think the other thing that's missing from all of that is the customer. That's another thing that I haven't heard a lot about, is actually, who are all these people serving? Well, they've got customers at the end of the day. Have they actually spoken to any of the customers and said, do you know what? JD Sports, Tesco, Morrison's, all those other companies, your service has got really bad since you've allowed your team to work at home. So I'm not going to use you anymore.
Well, I think there's an irony there, a complete and utter irony about it all. their custom, and many of these big corporations, their customer service centers are in India or Poland or wherever, nowhere near
the customer base itself.
The customer base itself.
Yeah,
So they have taken a decision to offshore that away from where that customer base is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think
we shall see.
I do think that you're absolutely right to bring it back to the customer, and I think but I don't believe the hybrid working or bringing people back into the office is necessarily going to impact a customer and the customer, the service perceived is much broader than that. It's about communication. It's about pricing. It's about so many different things that have to come together to drive that satisfaction. And I think having people in the office to facilitate that, I think is questionable. Whether that needs to happen.
Yeah, it's lovely to have your insight on that, Emma. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, it's Adam here. Thank you for listening to part 1 of our interview with Emma, where she talks about what a fractional CMO is, and then expands on what she's seeing out there in the world of hybrid working. Part 2, we will cover more detail around fractional CMOing. What are some of the common challenges? She talks about culture and how she can be part of a culture as a fractional senior leader within a business. Detail. She talks a little bit about that, the fact that it's a very detailed job. What does success look like for a fractional CMO? How does she judge that? What's changed for Emma too? She's come from a very corporate world of large American fintech and SaaS businesses. So what's changed for her? How has she had to operate differently? Something she misses perhaps, big budgets. What are the perks? What's next for Emma? And then, of course, how can we get in touch? Should you be interested to have a chat about bringing her into become a fractional CMO for you? So part 2 will be out soon. John and I really hope that you enjoyed and really got something meaningful from our latest episode of the podcast. If you'd like to comment or reach out to us and share your thoughts and ideas, we'd love to hear from you. And of course, if you would like to be a guest and we'd interview on our podcast, we'd love to have you on to talk about all the challenges that coming back into the office, the cultural elements as IT, HR professionals, office managers, and of course leaders as well. Please also do like and subscribe, and then it guarantees you get our latest podcast in your inbox. Thanks again for listening.